I'm Beth, I'm a PhD student and welcome back to my channel. I make videos about science, what it's like to do a PhD and also what it's like to live with tinnitus. If that's your kind of thing, then please consider subscribing and don't forget to click that notification bell so you can be notified when I release a new video. So today we're going to be talking about money and more specifically the cost of studying a postgraduate degree and the financial options or implications of that. I personally love talking about money. I love budgeting, I love finance, I love all of that kind of thing. And I think it's really empowering, as cheesy as that sounds, for women to talk about money. I think we need to talk about it more to reduce the stigma involved around talking about money. Before we start, I have to say, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is based on my own experience and my research. And if you have any serious concerns about your money or finances, then please speak to your bank or a financial advisor. And also, I have to mention as well that everyone's financial situation is different, so we shouldn't judge each other based on their financial decisions as we don't get the full picture, and to be honest, it's really none of your business what someone does with their money. Let's crack on, shall we? I'm going to start first all by talking about the cost of studying a postgraduate degree. A PhD naturally costs more than a master's because you're doing it for a longer period of time and it's research, so there's usually other cost implications involved in that. Tuition fees range from about £5,000 per year to £30,000 per year, with an average of about £11,000 per year. Fees are usually higher for international students, and if you'd like me to do a video on that, I will do, just let me know in the comments. What you pay in terms of tuition fees is really dependent on the field, the type of degree, the quality of the degree, the location, and the university. So all of these things can change how much your tuition fees are. Other costs to think about are the cost of living. You need to live during your degree, and you need to consider other things like travel costs, materials, funding to go to conferences, whether that's something that you are expected to do during your degree. And it's worth noting that the average student living costs are around £8,000 to £11,000 per year, and again that is really dependent on location. So if you're going to be doing your degree in London, for example, obviously the cost of living is much higher there, so you need to consider that when you're thinking about your postgraduate degree. Now, some of you might be thinking, can you reduce these costs in any way? Tuition fees are usually fixed, and if I'm right in saying that our tuition fees in the UK, although they seem high for UK students, they're actually not that high compared to other countries. In places like North America, you can be paying a lot more than we do. Education is extremely expensive, particularly higher education. In terms of reducing costs, you can be pretty frugal. I mean, I was pretty frugal when I was doing my undergraduate degree, and a lot of that has stayed with me during my postgraduate degree. So you can do that, but I mean, you have to seriously budget the hell out of that if you're gonna try and reduce a lot of costs. Some people have suggested that studying part-time can reduce those costs, but if you think about it, yes, you have a reduced tuition fee, but you're also doing it for a longer period of time, so overall you are going to be spending the same amount of money. But again, it's just whatever works for you, and if doing a degree part-time and then working part-time is what's financially viable to you, then go ahead and do that. Everyone's financial situation is completely different. Postgraduate degrees are a huge privilege. Studying at all and education is a massive, massive privilege, but studying for postgraduate degrees, where it's really expensive, is a huge privilege. However, the sheer cost of these degrees does make it inaccessible for those from lower income backgrounds. The only way people can really afford to do postgraduate degrees is by some kind of funding. Most people, like myself, wouldn't be able to self-fund or even contribute to funding in any way, whether that be master's or PhD. For context, I didn't study a master's because I just couldn't afford it. I was working instead. I did consider a part-time master's, but I just wasn't sure about it. You can, of course, work alongside your postgraduate studies, although postgraduate degrees are pretty intense. It's really up to you whether you think you can handle that, whether you think it's going to be too much of a workload, whether the pressure of working to be able to fund your degree is going to be too much. It really just depends. I would advise against it, but it's really up to you. I do have a video coming out soon about ways that you can top up your postgraduate income, so please watch out for that. So now we've spoken about the sheer cost of doing a postgraduate degree. What are the options for paying or funding that degree? First would be self-funding. I mean, obviously, if I could afford to do that, I would, but most of us can't. So self-funding is an option for some people, but it's really not for others. And what I mean by self-funding is you pay entirely for your degree yourself. So that would be down to your living costs, your tuition fees, your materials, your bench fees if you're doing a lab-based degree, and also travel costs, going to conferences, literally anything. So that would be pretty expensive, but if you are in the position to do that, then why not? The next is loans. So here in the UK, we have quite a few different government loan schemes for studying postgraduate degrees, very similar to the undergraduate degrees. For masters, it's roughly about £11,500 currently. So if you think about it, if your fees are £11,000 for your masters, then you only have about £500 or so left over to live on, which is not doable. So you'd have to really think about your living costs as well. For the PhD funding, which is the doctoral loan, which is quite a new thing actually, it's only been out for the last couple of years, that's about 27,600 and something. And again, it really does depend on your degree and what the costs are for that, because it might be enough to fund you for your entire PhD. It might be enough for your, living costs for that time, or it could just cover your tuition fees. So you will have to think about the entire cost of your degree if you are going to be looking at the doctoral loan option. The payback scheme is really similar to your university undergraduate government loans. This doesn't affect your credit score, so if you want to apply for credit or a mortgage in the future, then this doesn't affect your credit score, so you can be safe in that respect. The other option would be to take out a personal loan from a bank. So it really just depends whether that's something that's viable for you, whether that is even an option that you can consider. You're probably going to have shorter payback terms and potentially higher interest, and this will affect your credit score. So again, you've just got to find out what's financially viable for you. It could be a way to top up if you have the government loan in terms of like your living costs or tuition fees or whatever. It could be an option in that respect. Next up, we have scholarships, studentships, sponsorships, whatever you want to call them, ships. They all mean the same thing, essentially. These are highly competitive, but it means that you will get full funding or at least partial funding for your postgraduate degree. They usually have strict criteria, and like I said, they're super competitive, but please don't lose hope. It's not totally unachievable. If I can do it, you can certainly do it. I didn't even do a master's, so come on. If I can do it, you can certainly do it. A lot of universities do offer scholarships for if you want to study a master's at the place where you did your undergraduate degree. So it's usually dependent on your grades and kind of attendance and whether you were a good student, let's say, and you can get either a scholarship or a heavy discount to study a master's degree. I know that my university did this, and I know a lot of others do it. So if that's an option for you, if you don't mind staying at the same university, then by all means go for it. I don't think it really matters where you do your degrees. In some cases it does matter, but in many cases it doesn't. So just do what you feel is right for you. You will still get that degree. It doesn't matter where you did it. In terms of doing your master's at the place where you did your undergraduate degree with a scholarship or a discount, this can be a really sensible option in terms of financial viability. You can help fund your living costs by getting the master's loan, and that can really help that way. So I would consider it if it is an option for you. The PhDs, they're usually called studentships, and they typically include something called a stipend, which is your living costs or maintenance costs, whatever you want to call it. And this is essentially a tax-free salary, so you're paid to do your postgraduate degree. And I think it's good because when you're doing a PhD, you are working. It's not like you're studying, you're not really in lectures, you're learning in many ways, but you're researching and you're almost like an employee. So I think you should be paid as one, personally, but it would never be that simple, would it? Studentships tend to cover your tuition fees, your stipend, your materials, your travel costs, if you want to go to a conference, other development costs, if you want to go on any courses. So they are really, really great if you can get on one, but like I said, they are extremely competitive, but like I said, you can do it. So scholarships and studentships can either be through government schemes, they can either be through the universities themselves, charities, or businesses. If it's a business, it's usually called a sponsorship, and there's usually some kind of terms and conditions in there where you'd have to work for the business for an X amount of time after you graduate, because they've invested in you, they've sponsored you to do that degree, so you have to then help them by working at that company for X amount of time. That works for a lot of people, it might not work for you. It really does depend your situation and what kind of relationship you have with the business. You just don't really want to be stumped with having to pay fees if you decide to leave that job early. So again, it's whatever is right for you. I'd certainly recommend researching all of these things prior, because there's usually a lot of criteria for any kind of studentship or scholarship. It's also worth noting as well that studentships can be specific to courses, specific projects, degree or university, whereas others you can be awarded a scholarship and you have that funding, it's yours, and then you can then approach a university or a supervisor to then do your project. They're quite rare though, you don't see those a lot. A lot of studentships usually have a specific title for a project, or if you're doing a 4-year program, you usually do your MRes in your first year and you do a rotation, and then you write your research proposal at the end of that year for your PhD, which is the 3 years. So it does vary a lot. You have to do a lot of research before when it comes to applying, but there's lots of options there for scholarships, studentships, sponsorships, bursaries, any kind of thing. So you just kind of have to research it. A couple of websites like Find a Master's or Find a PhD sometimes offer bursaries, as well as smaller societies and charities. They can also offer bursaries as well. You should also be aware that some scholarships and studentships only cover tuition fees and they don't cover living costs, so that's something that you may have to think about. That could be another option where you get the student loan as an option to help with living costs. So I'm going to give a little bit more information on stipends. These are to cover your living costs throughout your postgraduate degree, and they vary a lot just in the UK. I don't even want to think about what it's like across the world. I know in like North America, for example, you are a research assistant, so you get paid for your teaching and not your research. So it does vary no matter where you are. I also saw as well that Ireland has like the lowest stipend rates as well, which is quite sad. It's about 12,000 euros per year, which is really not much at all. So yeah, it does vary. In the UK, you're looking at about 12,500 to 23,000 pounds per year, depending on your funding source. Charities like BHF and Wellcome Trust on their 4-year programs and sometimes their 3-year programs do offer really generous stipends, and they also increase each year, which is really nice because you are taking on more responsibility. It's almost like you're working, and you have the benefits and incentive of the stipend increase each year. For full transparency, I am funded by the BHF, so I have a very generous stipend, which I'm exceptionally grateful for, considering that I worked as a research assistant before doing my PhD, and it's meant that I've not had to take a huge pay cut, which was one of the things that did concern me when it came to applying for postgraduate degrees. The standard stipend rate across the UK, I've taken this from UKRI, is about £15,285 per year. That's kind of your standard stipend, which is okay, like it's tax-free, so it's all right. I mean, personally, I think PhD students should be just not even referred to as students at this point. I think we should have a proper salary, and I think we should be able to pay tax, national insurance, and into a pension. I don't know, let me know if you think that too. I just think it would be better if we were employed as like postgraduate researchers, and then you get your qualification at the end of that upon submission of your thesis. And yes, obviously funding is involved in that, but I think we should be treated as employees instead of students, but hey ho. That's a bit of a tangent. We can talk about that at a different time. It's also worth noting that for some PhD studentships, students are required to teach undergraduate students as part of their stipend, whereas other programs, this isn't compulsory, it's optional, and you can get paid on top of your stipend for any teaching work that you do. It's worth checking this out before you apply. And another thing, there's postgraduate programs for masters, PhDs that also stipulate that you shouldn't work outside of your postgraduate degree, so you cannot obtain any other work. So again, I'd seriously check that out before you consider applying, because it's all well and good being accepted for something, but if it doesn't actually fit your needs, then it's not worth it. There's a lot of research involved when it comes to finding the right program, funding sources, any financial help really when it comes to doing a postgraduate degree. In terms of finding funding and scholarships for masters or PhD, I'd really recommend looking at findamasters.com or findaphd.com. There's also prospects.ac.uk as well. There's a lot of information about funding. Also, you can look at very specific charities and see what other grants are available, and also look at the universities specifically, because there might be some grants or bursaries available to you, particularly if you come from a lower income background. So I know it's a lot of work, but really look into what options you have. There are lots of options out there, and hopefully you should find something that works for you in order to be able to study your postgraduate degree. Other funding available, and don't laugh when I say this, is crowdfunding. I know it might sound cringy and cheesy and just a little bit weird to even consider, but you'd be really surprised by the generosity of strangers. If it's something that you've always wanted to do and you are desperate for some help, then you can look into crowdfunding. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Also, let me know in the comments if you found this helpful and if I've missed anything off, or there's anything that you'd like me to cover in terms of money for postgraduate students. I'd happily make more videos about money. Kind of love it. If you don't follow me on social media already, it's @_Bethology. I'd love to connect with you, and thank you again for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell. See you in the next one.